Today we consider a very important question. Does the inclusion of a group of frenzied pyromaniac looters like goblins as a playable ancestry ruin tabletop fantasy RPGs? Or are player characters just upset that they finally have some competition? Today, we review the Pathfinder 2nd Edition Core Rulebook on this episode of the Local Disaster Tour Guide. Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Mark and I am the Local Disaster Tour Guide. That's right, I am a storyteller who is always on the lookout for new tools that I can use to make you terrified of what's around the next bend in the dungeon. Welcome to my channel where we talk about role-playing games like Pathfinder 2nd Edition. This video is going to be the first video in a new series, the Local Disaster Tour Guide Reviews Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Today we're going to talk about the Pathfinder 2nd Edition Core Rulebook, and let me just say this is a huge book. It comes in at over 600 pages. It introduces a new playable ancestry, the Goblins. It also introduces a new core class, the Alchemist, to the Pathfinder system and setting. And today we're going to talk about Pathfinder 2nd Edition, what I like about the game, some of the criticisms that I have for the game and for the core rulebook in particular, and what you want to be mindful of if you try to check this system out. Now, I will say up front that I really love Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and that's actually why I'm starting my reviews with this system. It's a new system. It's been out less than a year as of the publication of this video, so I don't have a ton of material for this system yet. I felt like that would be a good place to start doing RPG reviews, just because I can get through the material that I have reasonably quickly. Also, since it's a new game, now is an excellent time to check the game out. However, I do intend to broaden this review series to other RPGs and other RPG products as opportunity presents itself. So, come along for the conversation, and I will give you my honest thoughts about Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and especially the core rulebook. Now, before I dive into this review, there is a very important grain of salt that I would like to give you. This is something you should be mindful of on any review that I do, and in fact on any review that you find across the internet. The most important thing you can remember when it comes to role-playing games and other products is that playing the game for yourself is going to be the most beneficial thing you can do in determining whether or not it's something you would like to invest in. You can get a lot of good information from listening to the reviews and thoughts of people online, but playing a game for yourself, sitting in on a game, borrowing a book from somebody who has a copy, these are all excellent ways to get first-hand experience to really determine if a game is right for you. So I do hope that the information I offer will be helpful for you, but I definitely encourage you to check out the game for yourself before deciding whether or not it's something you would like to buy into. So when I do a review of a role-playing game, I actually like to start at the end. I want to give you my overall thoughts on the book, and then I want to work through how I arrived at those conclusions. So, for the Pathfinder 2nd Edition Core Rulebook, I give this book and this system a solid A. This is a very good game and a fantastic product, and I am really impressed by what Paizo has brought to the table with this game. Now let me just say, I feel like that A is a fair grade. I do have some criticisms of Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and I do have some criticisms of this book, but overall I feel like this is a fantastic product, and I am willing to say that this is my favorite role-playing game to date. Now, some of you all might accuse me of being a Paizo fanboy, And if I'm being entirely transparent, it's true. This is not a paid review or sponsored review in any way. I'm just talking about a game that I love. But I will admit that I have been a fan of Paizo for years. I've been following them since the early 2000s when they were publishing Dungeon and Dragon magazines for D&D 3.5. I really like the company, and I really like a lot of things that they've done. I feel like Pathfinder 2nd Edition is continuing a very positive trend of excellent products that I've seen them put out. However, I do not give Paizo a free pass just because I like the company. There have been times in the past that Paizo has put out books that I don't like, and I am not afraid to criticize the company when I feel like they have put out something that is not up to their usual quality. I may be speaking well of the core rulebook for 2nd edition today, but I really hope if Paizo ever finds my channel that they don't see the review for this book first, because I will not be nice. So, I definitely believe that Pathfinder 2nd Edition is a fantastic game. A natural question that pops up here is, how does Pathfinder 2nd Edition compare to Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition? I don't want to spend a lot of time on this question because, one, I feel like they're both good games, and two, I don't feel like I can give a proper answer to that question. For the last 10 years, Pathfinder 1st Edition has been my primary game. I have been a storyteller for Pathfinder 1, and I have been a player for Pathfinder 1e. I have spent a lot of time with that system. For D&D 5e, I have only ever been a player. I have never been a game master. As a result, when it comes to D&D 5e, I've really only seen half of the coin. As a result, if I tried to compare the two systems, I don't feel like I would be able to give a full and serious comparison. I do feel like they are both good games. I personally feel like Pathfinder 2nd Edition is probably the stronger game, but I feel like my perspective is limited, so I don't know how trustworthy that recommendation would be in the grand scheme of things. The only comparison that I do want to touch on between Pathfinder 2nd Edition and D&D 5e is I've heard a lot of people say that Pathfinder 2nd Edition is more complex and D&D 5e is simpler. I don't think that's quite fair. A lot of people will tell you if you like crunchier or more involved rules, go with Pathfinder, and if you like a simpler game, go with D&D. But honestly, I feel like they're complex in different ways. I have seen brand new role players, people who have never picked up a dice before, play their first game in Pathfinder 2nd Edition and understand the game well enough to play it and play it well in less than 10 minutes. I feel like Pathfinder 2nd Edition is very accessible, and calling it complex might mislead people. So there is some complexity to Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I also feel like there's some complexity to D&D 5e. They're just complex in different ways. So if you hear that comparison, I will say I don't think that that is 100% true. So speaking of complexity, I would like to begin by talking about some of the quirks of Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I'm actually going to divide this review into 3 parts: quirks, criticisms, and strengths. And I want to start with quirks because an experienced gamer coming to Pathfinder 2nd Edition is going to encounter some things that are just different. Like, they're not good, they're not bad, it's just going to be different from what you have come to expect in other role-playing games, especially if you're coming from a Dungeons & Dragons or Pathfinder 1st Edition background. They've made some changes that can throw you off if you're not prepared for them. There are 3 quirks in particular that I would like to point out, because if you're an experienced gamer, I feel like these are going to be something that you will pick up on. Number 1, Pathfinder 2nd Edition really seems to focus on offensive options for characters over defensive options for characters. The second quirk that I would like to talk about is Pathfinder 2's trait system. And the third quirk that I want to talk about is the term feats. If you're a new gamer, these things probably won't mean much to you, but if you're an experienced gamer, these are probably going to be some things that will throw you off when you encounter them. Pathfinder has really shifted the focus of character choices towards offensive options. I'm not going to say that there are no defensive options, but if you are coming from Dungeons & Dragons or Pathfinder 1st Edition, you're going to notice that you have a lot more offensive options to choose from than you have seen in the past. In fact, the defensive choices that you get to make and the defensive items that you get to find are often on down the road a bit. You pick up the offensive improvements first, and then defense is a secondary consideration. In previous editions of the game, usually the defensive upgrades came first, and then as you progress down the road, you would get better and better at the offensive side of what your character does. I think this is an interesting switch. I have not heard any commentary from the actual designers of Pathfinder 2nd Edition on this, so I don't know if it's intentional or not, but I suspect that this was a deliberate change. I personally feel like offensive choices are more impactful emotionally for players, and I think that Paizo has switched the focus towards offensive choices to help people become more invested in the game. Again, I don't know if that's the case, but it is something that I definitely see over and over again with this game. I will say the defensive stuff is still there. It's just been baked into your character progression in a way that you don't think about it as much as you used to in older versions of the game. So if you're coming to Pathfinder 2nd Edition from other versions of the game, don't be surprised if you're making offensive choices for your character before the defensive options start showing up. The second quirk that I want to talk about with the Pathfinder 2nd Edition Core Rulebook is the shift in focus on traits. We've seen traits in other fantasy role-playing games. A trait is simply a defining characteristic of something. It might be something like humanoid or elf. Usually traits will become important when you're looking at things like what spells affect particular individuals. We've seen traits before, but Pathfinder 2nd Edition has definitely made traits more important. Now, they're not overwhelmingly important, but they are definitely going to show up more than you have seen in previous versions of the game. You have a lot of the traits that we've seen in the past, humanoid, goblin, dwarf, things like that. But now you're going to find traits for things like class feats. In fact, every class typically has 1 to 4 important traits that show up for their class feats. For example, monks might see a trait like stance or incapacitation. Most of your casting classes are going to have feats that have the metamagic trait. Even skill feats and general feats have traits as well. One of the traits that shows up a lot, especially if you're a halfling, is the fortune and misfortune trait, which are roughly analogous to advantage and disadvantage in D&D 5e. Not a perfect comparison, but it's kind of close to that concept. Traits are all over the place, and they are definitely more important than they have been in the past. If you're coming to Pathfinder 2nd Edition, you want to take the time to pay attention to the traits that your character has and the traits that their abilities have as well. Personally, I don't feel like the trait system is too complex. As I mentioned, most classes have 1 to 4 traits that they typically have to deal with, so the number of rules that you're actually keeping up with are usually fairly minimal and fairly easy to understand. But traits are an important part of this system, and they're an important part of how the game functions, so you will want to pay a little more attention to those than you might have in the past. Finally, a third quirk of Pathfinder 2nd Edition is the use of the term feats. Actually, this kind of borderlines on a criticism of Pathfinder 2nd Edition. There's going to be a positive on down the road, but for now, Pathfinder 2nd Edition really uses the term feats a lot. You have Ancestry feats, you have general feats, skill feats, class feats, you have archetype feats. There are a variety of different feats, and they are all over the place. If you're coming to Pathfinder 2nd Edition for the first time, and especially if you are a new player, this terminology can be a little bit overwhelming. So let me give you some shorthand really quick. The word feat means feature. So anytime you see the word feat, read feature. Really, honestly, the word feat is not that important. It's whatever word is in front of the word feat that kind of determines what you need to know in that instance. Your ancestries will have features from that ancestry. So anytime you see the phrase ancestry feat, you are picking a feature from the list of options for your ancestry. Anytime you see the phrase class feat, again, you are picking a feature from the list of options for your class. Whatever feat you're looking at, the word in front of you tells you what choice you're actually making. Personally, I wish that they hadn't used the word feat quite so much. I wish that when you were making choices for ancestry and class and skills, I wish that they had broken those up with some different terminology so that it didn't muddy the waters. But just know if you see feat, it means feature, and the word in front of feat is going to tell you where you are picking that particular option. So those are just a few of the quirks of Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and if you're coming to this game for the first time, you definitely want to be aware of those things so it doesn't throw you off when you're trying to make sense of the rules. So now's a good time for me to actually talk about some of the criticisms that I have for this product. There's not a lot of criticisms, but there are definitely some things that I want to point out because I do feel like they are flaws that you need to be aware of if you are going to consider purchasing the Pathfinder 2nd Edition Core Rulebook. Today I would like to talk about 3 things in specific. First off, I'd like to talk about some of the poor editing and formatting for this book. Second off, I would like to talk about the complete lack of vehicle rules in the core rulebook. And third, I need to nitpick the proficiency system just a little bit. So if you have heard any of the internet chatter surrounding Pathfinder 2nd Edition and their core rulebook, you have probably heard about my first complaint, which is the editing and formatting problems with this book. I will say I think some people have overblown how bad the editing and formatting problems are, but I will acknowledge that it is a problem. There is a lot of bad editing and bad formatting with this book, and it will cause you some frustration if you purchase this product. On the editing side of the coin, the Alchemist class, the Wizard class, and the Sorcerer class all had a major editing error in the initial print run of the book. Now, to Paizo's credit, they did release the errata very quickly, and they addressed those errors, and they addressed several of the other errors that popped up in the first print run of this book. But there are a lot of editing errors, and if you purchase the first print run of Pathfinder 2nd Edition, you're probably going to have to deal with those errors. I do recommend go ahead, download the errata, because there are some important fixes that you're going to need to be aware of. However, editing mistakes is not something I want to spend a lot of time on because Paizo is aware of those editing mistakes and they moved to address those mistakes very quickly. I believe that future print runs of this product are going to fix those. So down the road, I don't think that editing mistakes needs a lot of time and attention. But I do have some problems with the formatting of this book. I will say overall, Pathfinder 2nd Edition is reasonably easy to understand. I was able to keep track of most things. I was able to build characters successfully. They do a lot of positive things in this book to help you understand what is important when you're building your character. They actually use sidebars for each of the classes that talk about the important traits that you need to be aware of when you're rolling up your character. That's an example of good formatting. But an example of bad formatting? Focus spells. Paizo, if you ever see this video, can you find the person who decided to hide focus spells from me and just shake them or something? I don't know what it is about focus spells and the classes in this book, but if the class had a focus spell, I had to hunt like crazy to find it in the class description. It's like you were actively trying to hide them from me. I don't understand some of the layout decisions that you made. Here's another big one. Chapter 8 of this book is setting information about the Age of Lost Omens. It's 24 pages that talks about the Inner Sea region of the Galarian campaign setting, and let me tell you, 20 of those 24 pages are basically not useful. I'm sorry to say this, but one paragraph per country and one paragraph per in-world organization really doesn't help at all. I don't know why you put setting information in the core rulebook. I really feel like you could just take most of that section, pluck it out, and replace it with something else, and it would actually make a better product. Honestly, the only 4 pages that are actually useful in the setting information chapter is the deities, domains, and domain spells. And speaking of formatting, the domain spell chart, that either should have been with the class descriptions or in the spell chapter. I don't know why you randomly put that chart in the settings section. The only thing that did was mean that I have to reference 3 different chapters when I'm trying to roll up my cleric or my champion. This isn't helpful. So let me just say, formatting is a problem with this book. Again, I think some people have overblown how bad the formatting is. I still feel like this book is very readable and very understandable, and there are places where the formatting is good. For example, they point out the important traits you have to pay attention to with each class that you attempt to roll up. But be aware, there are formatting issues here, and they are going to cause you some headaches. So the next complaint that I would like to talk about is the complete lack of vehicle rules in the core rulebook. Couple of caveats real quick. Number one, yes, I do know that they put vehicle rules in the Game Mastery Guide. I have a copy of the Game Mastery Guide. I have read the vehicle rules there. I know they exist. But I firmly believe that those rules should have been in the core rulebook instead. This is something of a personal gaming style complaint, but this is a big thing for me. All of my gaming groups, we love vehicles. It doesn't matter what style of game we're playing, there is going to be a major segment of the game that turns into vehicles and stuff about vehicles when we play. I have had groups spend way too much time investing money in a war chariot. I have had groups that spent way too much time overhauling a space U-Haul van. I'm serious, my gaming group loves vehicles, and we use vehicles every campaign. The lack of vehicle rules in the core rulebook really is a letdown for me. Now, as I've said, the vehicle rules do exist in the Game Mastery Guide, but if I'm being honest about those rules, I feel like it's about 80% of a developed rule set. I'll talk about the vehicle rules more specifically when I review that book, but for now, let me just say, I feel like the vehicle rules that were given to me in that book were tacked on to the rules in this book rather than being well integrated with the rules. I really wish Paizo had taken the time to fully incorporate vehicle rules into the core rulebook. Now you may ask, the core rulebook is already gigantic. Where would they put those rules? Well, I just told you a few moments ago that there's 20 pages of pretty much useless setting information. You could pull the setting information out of this book and replace it with the victory point system, the infiltration rules, the chase rules, and the vehicle rules from the Game Mastery Guide, and the page count would be essentially identical. I really wish that Paizo had left out the setting information and instead replaced it with a few crucial and well-integrated rule systems, most importantly, vehicles. I feel like that would have really improved the quality of this game. The last thing that I want to offer as a criticism for Pathfinder 2nd Edition and the core rulebook is, while I really like the proficiency system in Pathfinder 2e, there are definitely some areas where I feel like it was not implemented as well as it should have been. One example of this is weapon proficiencies. I really do not understand why Pathfinder 2nd Edition kept simple, martial, and exotic weapons as the proficiency groups. I really wish that weapon group and weapon group proficiencies had been broken out into things like swords, hammers, and bows. I wish that there had been a variety of different groups and that you could have really customized and focused your character with the weapon group proficiencies that you chose for them. You may think that that would be an unnecessary addition to the game, but if you look at the fighter class in Pathfinder 2e, they already have focused advancements for weapon groups. Weapon groups already exist in the game. It would have been very easy to discard simple martial and exotic weapons and just replace it with weapon groups. I think it could have created much more interesting and well-developed characters, and I feel like holding on to those old groupings is actually detrimental to the system. Another area where I feel like there are some problems with the proficiency system is with the skills. Now I will say this, overall, I feel like the skills in 2nd edition are very positive and very strong. It's actually going to be one of the areas I talk about in the strengths segment of this video. But I do feel like there were elements of the skill system that were left out. One good example, what skill do you use to drive vehicles? Yes, I know I'm bringing up vehicles again, but there is no clear skill in Pathfinder 2nd Edition for driving a chariot or a cart or an airship. This is an area where I feel like the proficiency system ends up being a little bit weak just because it wasn't implemented fully or implemented properly. Another glaring problem with the proficiency system is the lack of a skill like sense motive or insight. It just gets wrapped up into perception and kind of tossed to the side, and I feel like that's a weakness of this system. I really wish that they had separated that sense motive or insight concept from perception and had made it its own unique portion of the skill system for this game. So now that we've talked about some of the quirks and some of my criticisms for 2nd edition, we can move on to the strengths of Pathfinder 2nd edition. I genuinely think that the strengths of this game vastly outweigh the weaknesses of this game, and there is a lot to like about Pathfinder 2nd edition. In specific, I want to talk about 4 strengths of the game. I want to talk about the action economy. I want to talk about spellcasting. I want to talk about the TEML proficiency system, and I want to talk a little bit about character creation. All of these, I think, are excellent examples of the strength of Pathfinder 2nd edition. But before I dive into those, I want to give you some points of comparison so you can understand why I think so highly of these elements of the game. Real quick, I would like to share two game systems that have been very impactful on me throughout my gaming career. The first is D20. This is exemplified by games like Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 or Star Wars D20. Pathfinder 1st Edition was actually an offshoot of the D20 system, and I have played a lot of D20 games over the years. The other system that I played a lot of is White Wolf games. This is exemplified by games like Hunter the Reckoning or Exalted. This is another system that I have played extensively throughout my career. Now, I've played both systems a lot, and one of the things I've realized over the years is that I enjoy both systems for very different reasons. White Wolf games had two notable strengths with any system that they produced. First, their character sheet was universally easy to understand. You could be a brand new player to a White Wolf game, look at their character sheet, look at the dot system that they use to rank characters, and immediately you would understand 90% or better of what was happening on your character sheet. It was very, very intuitive. I loved that about White Wolf games. The other thing I really enjoyed, White Wolf games had a very flexible and free-form character creation system, and you could really customize your character to fit whatever concept you were aiming for. On the other side of the spectrum was D20 games. And over the years, slowly but surely, the D20 system actually won out for me. It became my preferred gaming system for a very strange reason. The math was good. Let me explain. If you have ever read the Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 Dungeon Master Guide, it actually talks about how the mathematics behind the game is developed around the idea that you are playing a team game. The mathematics assume that you have a group of 4 people and that they are working together, they have different strengths and weaknesses, and they have to support one another to overcome their challenges. The mechanical structure of the game is built around the idea that you are playing a team game, that it is cooperative. That mathematical assumption is not present in White Wolf games. A simple example for those of you who may have played both systems, it is possible in Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 and White Wolf to play a character who starts with an ability called Burning Hands. If you have ever played Dungeons & Dragons 3.5, you know that Burning Hands is a reasonable and relatively balanced ability. And if you have ever played White Wolf games, you know that Burning Hands is a reason to get your character banned at character creation. I'm serious. The mechanical balance of White Wolf games was always off, and it really detracted from the long-term playability of those games for me. Now, real quick, I'm sure there are people who will say, what about high-level Dungeons & Dragons? What about high-level D20? Don't the mechanical assumptions break down at those levels? Yes, it's true. But honestly, that's the exception that proves the rule. If you're complaining about the breakdown of the math at high levels, you're really arguing that it is the consistent math at low levels that made the game solid. So over the years, I really found myself searching for a way to combine the best elements of both systems. I wanted an internal mechanical consistency to my games. I wanted that core assumption of the game to be built around team play and for the mathematics of the game to support that style of play. But I also wanted a game that was approachable and understandable by new players. Well, Pathfinder 2nd Edition has done that for me. It has combined the best elements of these two different games and really produced a game that I think is strong on both of those particular points. I think that Pathfinder 2nd Edition is very mechanically sound, that the mathematics behind the game support cooperative play very well. I also think that the game is very approachable and understandable for new players. It is the combination of both of these things in one game system that caused me to love Pathfinder 2nd Edition so much. So let's dive into my specific examples from earlier so I can show you what this looks like. So one of the obvious strengths of Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and one that I imagine a lot of you have already heard, is the action economy of Pathfinder 2nd Edition is extremely well done. In Pathfinder 2nd Edition, on your turn, you have 3 actions and 1 reaction. That's it. Think of 3 things you want to do on your turn, and do those 3 things. Do you want to stand still and just attack your enemy over and over and over again? You have that option. Do you want to move? Do you want to dive for cover? Do you want to pull an item out of your backpack? Whatever 3 actions you want to perform, those are the 3 actions that are available to you on your turn. By the same token, every character gets 1 reaction during the round. Regardless of what reactions you have access to, you get 1 of them. And the important decision making in the game is when to use a reaction and which reaction is the most beneficial to use. The action economy is structured in a way that it is very simple and easy to understand, and by the way, extremely approachable for new players. Remember when I said that a strength of White Wolf games was a new player could understand it very quickly? This is an example of a game mechanic that is so simple that a new player can grasp it in a single explanation. It is expertly done. Bravo, Paizo. You knocked it out of the park with your action economy. On top of that, the action economy maintains some interesting design space without sacrificing that simplicity. When you look at spellcasting, the classic actions associated with spellcasting, such as verbal components, somatic components, and material components, have now been turned into actions for spellcasting. So, if your spell has verbal and somatic components, it takes 2 actions on your turn to cast that spell. This is a very flavorful way to work classic elements of the game into your system while keeping the mechanics very simple and easy to grasp. Also, this is a little bit of a side note, but Paizo has done a really good job of streamlining their spellcasting rules. The vast majority of spells in Pathfinder 2nd Edition only cost 2 actions. There's a narrow group of spells that are very quick and require 1 action. There's a small subset of spells that are stronger but require 3 actions, but the vast majority of the time it uses 2 of your actions to cast 1 of your spells. This system is fantastic. And you can tell that Paizo really took the time to think through how these actions were going to be used in game so that it would be understandable and approachable for new players. The other thing you can tell is that Paizo took the time to consider how your actions and activities were going to be balanced against other things that other players might do. A good example of this is the spellcasting traditions in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. There are 4 spellcasting traditions: Arcane, Occult, Divine, and Primal. In Pathfinder 1st Edition and in old versions of Dungeons & Dragons, you typically had 2 traditions, Arcane and Divine. Every spellcasting class in the game had to fit under one of those 2 umbrellas. It was either an Arcane class or a Divine class, and a lot of the challenge in game design space was differentiating classes that existed under the same spellcasting tradition. For example, in older versions of the game, Clerics and Druids were both Divine casters, even though you would expect that the spell list of those 2 classes would be something separate. Now, in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, they did separate out Druids from Clerics, but it's still been a long-standing issue of the game that you only had 2 traditions that were trying to cover every possible example of spellcasting. Well, almost every possible example of spellcasting. You see, every version of Dungeons & Dragons eventually brought in a third tradition. Yes, let's talk about that very questionable rule set, Psyonix. Now, I will say, I enjoyed Psyonix. I enjoy the concept of the psychic caster, and I really liked a lot of the stuff that Pathfinder First Edition did with their take on the rules. Their occult magic tradition was very interesting in terms of flavor, and there was a lot of fun, flavorful stuff that existed under that rule set. As a general rule, I like the concept of psionics, but the mechanics have always been iffy. I have seen many versions of this rule set throughout the years, and if I'm being honest, never once have I seen psionic magic or psychic magic or occult magic be properly balanced against the other two traditions, arcane and divine, that were in the game. When psionics came into the game, it always shifted the power balance, and usually in a negative way. Years ago, I played in a second edition AD&D campaign, and the dungeon master was using psionic rules, but the psionic rules were so strong that the dungeon master actually passed out free low-level psionic powers to every player in the game so that they would be reasonably on par with the psionicist that was in the party. I love a flavorful mechanic, but when you have to pass out free abilities to every other player at the game, there's some clear balancing issues with that mechanic. Sadly, I've seen this happen a lot. In every edition of the game, when psychic magic was brought in, the mechanics shifted, and never in a positive way. Well, Pathfinder 2nd Edition thought about that. They no longer have two traditions, they have four. Arcane and Divine have now become Arcane, Occult, Divine, and Primal. Arcane magic holds the same slot it always has, and Divine magic holds the same slot that it typically has held as well. But now, Druids are in the Primal magic category. They get their own distinct and clear-cut set of magic. And Occult magic is part of the core game as well. They have taken four traditions, made them very distinct, made them very clear, and taken the time to determine how these four traditions interact with one another. If you actually look at the developer commentary for spellcasting, each tradition overlaps two other traditions roughly 50% of the time. If you take the four traditions, they stack on top of each other in a very clear pattern and relate to one another in a very clear way. This is fantastic, internally consistent mechanical game design. This is incredible work. And on top of that, Paizo took the time to give all of these magical traditions very clear, very flavorful elements. Personally, I love the new design for the Druid class, and I can't wait to play a true Primal caster. I am excited for all of the options Paizo gave me there. But the move to four spellcasting traditions is a fantastic move, and it is a clear example of Paizo taking the time to make sure that that core mechanical structure of the game was properly built so that it supports team play to the highest degree. Next, I want to talk about the Proficiency System in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, because I feel like this is the unsung hero of Pathfinder 2nd Edition. In White Wolf games, your character's abilities are reflected by dots on a character sheet. 0 dots means you have no training in a skill. 1 dot would be associated with weak or novice levels of ability. 2 dots would be appropriate for an average person, and it goes on up from there to the point where 5 dots represents world-class ability in a particular area. It's very quick, it's very intuitive, it's very easy to understand. The classic problem with D20 games is that the mechanics of the game are not that clear and easy to understand. In a D20 game, if you have +6 to your attack roll, is that good, average, or bad? Well, it depends. It really depends on what you're playing, what level you are, what challenges are going on around you. There is so much context necessary for that +6 to attack to become understandable that in and of itself, just seeing +6 on your character sheet truly doesn't mean much. It's one of the major disadvantages of games like Pathfinder and Dungeons and Dragons. Old versions of the game had all of these numbers, but those numbers were meaningless without context. For a simple comparison, +6 to attack is a lot more powerful in Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition than it is in Pathfinder 1st edition. Well, Pathfinder 2nd edition has changed that. The proficiency system in Pathfinder 2nd edition follows a 5-point scale, although typically 1 point on that scale is kind of left to the side. In Pathfinder 2nd edition, on basically anything, you can have one of 5 levels of proficiency. You can be completely untrained, you can be trained, expert, master, or legendary. Those are the possibilities. And here's the thing, those 5 possibilities are very easy to understand. If you heard untrained, trained, expert, master, and legendary, you would be able to understand the context and connotation of those terms with very little additional explanation. If you picked up a character sheet and saw that you were an expert with swords, you would immediately expect to be able to do certain things and perform at a certain level when using swords. By the same token, if you were legendary in spellcasting, you expect to be able to rend worlds with your mind. That term, legendary, is very understandable even for a new player. By the same token, if you look down at your character sheet and see that you are utterly untrained at stealth, you know that sneaking is not a good idea for you. Pathfinder 2nd Edition has implemented this proficiency system as a way of calculating the bonuses that you get for your rolls. If you are untrained, you calculate your bonuses a specific way. If you are trained, you calculate your bonuses again a specific way, and that is true expert, master, and legendary, obviously with the bonuses getting higher the farther you go up on that scale. This was a genius decision. In the past, with D20 games, you calculated your bonus and then you compared your bonus to everything else in an effort to decide how good you are. Pathfinder flipped the script. You decide how good you are and you use that to calculate your bonus. And the brilliant thing is, new players can understand this very, very easily. I was running a one-shot Pathfinder 2nd Edition game for a brand new player, and they attempted to do something that was a little bit off script for my session. They decided to use an improvised weapon during one of the combats, and I had to make a rules call very quickly when they did so. I thought about the improvised weapon that they were using, and I basically decided that it was the equivalent to a simple weapon. So I said, okay, I'm going to consider this to be a simple weapon attack. And I told them, you need to calculate your bonus. So what I want you to do is look down at the bottom of your character sheet and see what your proficiency is for simple weapons. So they did that. They looked down at the bottom of their character sheet. They happened to be an expert with simple weapons. And then something amazing happened. I tried to give them the formula to calculate what their bonus should be, but they already knew the formula and they gave it to me before I could finish explaining what the formula was supposed to be. This was a brand new player. They had never rolled a single dice before they played Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and they calculated an unknown bonus in literally less than 8 seconds. That moment told me, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Pathfinder 2nd Edition has an incredible mechanical consistency, but also an approachable system. A new player can look at the character sheet and see Untrained, Trained, Expert, Master, and Legendary and instantly understand what they should be able to do and how good they are in comparison to the other people around them. I don't hear a lot of people on the internet talking about Pathfinder 2nd Edition's proficiency system, but believe me when I say, from the perspective of an experienced game master, this is truly one of the strongest elements of the game. Now, as an aside, I did nitpick the proficiency system a few minutes ago. I explain it this way. The core mechanics to the proficiency system is incredible. Some of the execution of the system, I feel they could have done a little bit better of a job with, but behind the scenes, when you look at the core of the game, the proficiency system for Pathfinder 2nd Edition is the best proficiency system I have ever seen, and I cannot speak highly enough of what it does for this game. So that brings us to the last point. And this may be the most important point. I don't want to dig in too deep here, but let's just talk about character creation. Because at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, can I play the character that I want to play? I have to give props to Pathfinder 2nd Edition for a very robust, very intelligent, very well-designed character creation system that is truly, truly flexible. I have done over 35 Theorycraft builds for Pathfinder 2nd Edition since its release, and I've got to say, very rarely have I been disappointed by the options that are available literally in just the core rulebook. I have several books that have been released for the system, but really, for a lot of the characters that I can come up with, the core rulebook is adequate to portray those characters. I really think that the character creation system is an incredible strength of Pathfinder 2nd Edition because you really can come up with some varied and interesting characters, and they have designed a game where it is very easy to differentiate your character from other characters at the table. The core of Pathfinder 2nd Edition character creation is what they call the ABCs of character creation: Ancestry, Background, and Class. All three of these are solid components. Ancestry is roughly equivalent to what you would have called a character's race in previous versions of the game. Now you have your ancestry, which represents the elven or dwarven background of your character, but on top of your ancestry, you actually get to pick what is known as a heritage. Your heritage allows you to differentiate yourself from other elves or other dwarves or other humans in the same game. So as a simple example, you can have a cavern elf and a woodland elf, and this makes for two very different characters. On top of that, you get ancestry feats. Ancestry feats is another way you get to differentiate yourself from other characters with the same ancestry. You can really build your own unique elf or dwarf or gnome or whatever you may happen to be playing. By the way, there's that term feats again. You may remember we talked briefly about the term feats when we were going through quirks. Well, here's the reverse side of that coin. Yes, I think that they over-relied on the term feats, but there is a specific design principle in Pathfinder 2nd Edition that they call feat silos. In old versions of the game, feats was kind of this huge pool of options, and any character could grab feats anywhere they wanted. But quite often, there were very clear and very obvious best choices, and you had to choose between making a mechanically effective character or making a mechanically interesting character. In Pathfinder 1st Edition, there were feats that corresponded to a particular racial heritage. So you could get feats that represented your abilities as an elf or as a halfling. But if you took those feats, quite often you were sacrificing a combat feat or something else that was much more mechanically impactful. In Pathfinder 2nd Edition, they have created feat silos. Under all of the important sections of your character, you have different silos of feats that you can pick for that aspect of your character. So you have Ancestry feats, you have skill feats, you have class feats. You also have a category called General feats that are more flexible and more open to any character. I know that was a bit of a tangent, but I really like the feat silos design because it really shows how they've added a ton of flexibility to character creation while keeping it very understandable and approachable. You can build the character you want to build, but the core mechanics are designed to work together well. The next thing you choose for your character is your background. This represents what you were before you became an adventurer. Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition also has a background concept. I like the fact that both games have brought this in. It is debatable whether Pathfinder 2e or D&D 5e did this better. I feel like D&D 5e's backgrounds are stronger but vaguer. Pathfinder 2nd Edition, the backgrounds are much more defined, they're much more clear-cut, but their impact vanishes quicker. So it's debatable which one is better. Personally, I like Pathfinder just because I like how well designed the core structure of the game is, but this is an area where you could debate which system is stronger. Finally, you choose your class. This is another core concept that we see in a lot of games: fighter, wizard, cleric, rogue, sorcerer, the new core classes, alchemist. There are a lot of great concepts here. I can't begin to dive into everything under the class section. There are a lot of positives here, and I will come back in a future video and talk about it more in depth. Once again, with every class, you have a silo of feats to choose from that you can use to differentiate yourself from other members of the same class. This is a theme that you will see a lot when we talk about Pathfinder 2nd Edition, but I realize that this review has gone on pretty long at this point, so I'm going to wrap things up here. Pathfinder 2nd Edition is a very, very strong role-playing game. The core mechanics of the game are extremely well developed. You can tell that the designers of the game took their time to figure out how all of the pieces were going to fit together. They took their time to figure out how the proficiency was going to interact with the different classes and how the classes were going to balance against one another. They took the time to figure out how spellcasting and different things that your character might choose to do should interact with the action economy. The internal mechanical balance of the game is incredible. The execution can be off here or there, but the overall structure of the game is fantastic, and Paizo has laid an incredible foundation. On top of that, they have built a very flexible character creation system that is also very approachable. I have personally witnessed new players very quickly grasp this game and very quickly grasp the impact of different things that they choose on the game. The understandable and approachable nature of Pathfinder 2nd Edition is absolutely beautiful. In fact, the biggest challenge in understanding Pathfinder 2nd Edition is just getting past some of the crazy formatting that they chose for the book. Overall, Pathfinder 2nd Edition is definitely my favorite role-playing game that has been published to date. I strongly recommend it, and I encourage you, check this game out. So, if you got through all of that, congratulations. I know that this has been an incredibly long video. I realize that I have just skimmed the surface of what Pathfinder 2nd Edition has to offer. For future videos, I am going to try to come back and talk in more detail about the Ancestry options and some of the class options. I'm going to come back and look at those things with a little bit more focus. But I hope that I have given you a good bird's eye view of the Pathfinder 2nd Edition role-playing system. This is a very solid game, and it's something I really enjoy. But the time has come for me to throw the conversation over to you. Have you played Pathfinder 2nd Edition? Have you read through the core rulebook? What do you like about Pathfinder 2e? And what are some of the criticisms that you would offer for the game? Let me know in the comments down below. If you've enjoyed this video, please like it and share it. Anything like that helps this channel to grow. Also, if you have any questions about Pathfinder 2nd Edition or some of the other books that they've put out, let me know. I'll try to get to that in a future video as well. Thank you for hanging with me, and thank you for being part of the conversation. Have a fantastic day. Hello everyone, this is Mark with the post-credits volunteer shout-out. I always like to take a little bit of time at the end of every video just to encourage you to get involved with volunteerism. I serve as a chaplain and volunteer coordinator at a local nonprofit, so I get to see the real-world impact of volunteers every single day. Allow me to say volunteers truly change the world, and if you've never considered volunteering, I would like to encourage you, take a shot and see what opportunities are out there. I know today's video was really long, so I don't want to eat up too much more of your time, but have you ever considered tutoring as a possible volunteer opportunity? Tutoring can be a great way to volunteer and help support people academically in your community. For several years, I actually served as the director of a tutoring program that was run by a church as an outreach to a particularly poor community where I lived. Over the course of about 7 or 8 years, I got to watch children grow up and succeed academically in ways that their socioeconomic status would have thought impossible. Today, I actually have some of my former tutoring students who are succeeding in college because of the support that they had through the tutoring program that I ran. If you enjoy working with kids, or if you are academically inclined, tutoring can be a great way to support your community and truly change the trajectory of somebody's life. So if you've never considered tutoring as an option, maybe I've opened your eyes, but regardless, for everyone who's listening to this, search out your passions, find a way that you can volunteer, find a way that you can bless your community, and let's help make this world a better place. Have a fantastic day.